Hey everyone, does this sound like a hero to you?
Chesimard was convicted in the killing of Trooper Werner Foster and the wounding of another trooper in a furious shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike in East Brunswick.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and that was a news report from years ago about the black militant Assata Shakur, who was most active in the 1970s. She passed away last September. Now, every year, the New York Times runs an end-of-year feature where they have various writers write remembrances of people who passed away over the last year, and they assign Shakur to Nicole Hannah Jones of 1619 notoriety, and this piece was notably, predictably as well, insane and immoral. Let's take a look. The United States government called her one of the world's most wanted terrorists. She begins the piece. Assata Shakur called herself a 20th century escaped slave, claiming the runaway slave narrative proved a powerful and inspirational metaphor. Drawing on historical memory, Shakur placed herself in the pantheon of black freedom fighters from Nat Turner to Harriet Tubman. It's so bad, it's almost hilarious. Now, you have to pay real close attention to the language here to understand the depths of the dishonesty. Shakur was not a runaway slave, so Hannah Jones can't say that she was a runaway slave. The New York Times fact checkers would catch that, and at the Times, they do a pretty careful job of fact checking whatever else you think of the newspaper and its political bias. So instead, she says Shakur called herself an escaped slave. Called herself. Anyone can call themselves anything. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't mean it has any connection to reality. I can call myself a Spitfire pilot from World War II who had a number of kills during the Battle of Britain. It doesn't make it so. And in fact, if I say that, that's discrediting to me. But Hannah Jones wants to lend credence to this insane idea that Shakur was an escaped slave, so she resorts to the language that she called herself that and says that she called herself that without bothering to say, oh, by the way, it's totally ridiculous. She was born in Queens. She went to City College. What she was a radical and a thug, but Hannah Jones wants to cover that up with a bunch of euphemism as well. She explains how Shakur became radicalized, then joined the Black Panthers. Now, the Black Panthers were under pressure from the FBI, and as Jones puts it, facing constant surveillance as she watched the party's leadership imprisoned, discredited, and assassinated, Shakur came to believe in the necessity of a covert armed revolution. Then she joined the Black Liberation Army, and Jones explains, quote, its members were accused of bombings, robberies, and murdering police officers, close quote. Again, you really have to pay close attention to the language here to understand the depth of the depravity of this piece. Hannah Jones is basically suggesting the FBI forced Shakur into endorsing violent revolution in America and trying to carry it out because of what it did to the Black Panthers. Well, why was the FBI concerned with the Black Panthers? Because the Black Panthers was a violent revolutionary group. This is the kind of organization the FBI should be targeting. Doesn't mean we need to endorse every tactic the FBI used, but this was a criminal organization. And then Hannah Jones has this free-floating reference to assassinations in this passage without spelling out, because it would be devastating to her case, that many of these assassinations were carried out among Black Panther and militant factions as part of these bitter internal rivalries. And then you got to love the way she says that the Black Liberation Army was accused of bombings, robberies, and murders. Why was it accused of such things? Because it actually carried them out. This was part and parcel of the violent revolution. You can't have violent revolution without the violence. So if you really want to understand this insane lunatic era in America in the 1970s with this far left criminal revolutionary activity, you should look up a fantastic, exhaustive, factual book by a guy named Brian Burrow called Days of Rage. Of course, Assata Shakur is a name that she adopted when she became radicalized. Prior to that, she was known as Joanne Chesimard. That too, by the way, was an adopted name. Now, she doesn't really come onto the radar screen until March 1971. She's graduated from City College. She started running with the Black Panthers, as Burrow puts it, and she's shot in the stomach during a robbery in a Midtown Manhattan hotel. And she wasn't getting robbed. She was carrying out the robbery. Later, she would say in an interview that these were expropriations, these kind of bank robberies. But this is sort of the activity that the Panthers and the Black Liberation Army, split off from the Panthers, were engaged in all the time. She was the medic at a safe house for a while. She helped nurse someone back to health after he had gotten shot in the stomach in a shootout with the police. Also, a witness placed her at the scene of this incredible incident where militants threw a grenade at a police car that was chasing them and then subsequently stole a bystander's car to make their getaway. All this was disgusting criminality, and I've skipped over a lot. Then you get the incident on the New Jersey Turnpike. This is what the news report at the beginning of this video was discussing. A cop pulls over a car. Shakur is in there with a bunch of other armed militants. There is a shootout. One cop is wounded, another murdered in cold blood. Shakur says, "Oh, I was just holding my hands up, trying to surrender the entire time," like leading members of the Black Liberation Army do all the time. The cops say no, true to the usual practice among BLA and other militants. She fired at the police. She's wounded in the chest. Eventually, she is tried for this and convicted and sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years. Now, you might think that'd be the end of the story, but no, there's more violence and more criminality. She's actually broken out of prison by fellow militants. They rob a mall to get funding for this operation. They stick guns against people's heads at the prison, threaten them with dynamite, and break her out. She goes into hiding and eventually makes her way to Cuba. How does Hannah Jones describe this? Quote, Shakur had been hidden in the United States for several years by a sort of underground railroad before being smuggled into Cuba and granted asylum as a political prisoner. Underground railroad? Underground railroad, that is a reference that, of course, comes with a sense of legitimacy and of righteousness. The Underground Railroad helped escaped slaves get to their freedom. What Nicole Hannah Jones is talking about here is a bunch of thugs who carried out crimes against innocent people, robbing them, threatening them with acts of violence in order to bust a convicted murderer out of prison and ensure that she never had to face justice. This is just perverse. And in this connection also, Hannah Jones spends an inordinate time in the essay talking about the cost to Shakur's family, to the life she chose. But she should have thought about that before she embarked on a career of radical criminality. Now, it's not just Hannah Jones who's perverse on this topic. The left generally, BLM activists, they all love Assata Shakur. Here's Mark Lamont Hill when she died last September.
Assata Shakur was an activist, an organizer, a mother, a writer, a revolutionary. Sure enough, revolutionary.
So Lamont Hill also engages in a lot of euphemism, pretends that Shakur was always falsely accused of all these various crimes. So Hannah Jones and Lamont Hill, what they ultimately do, they don't give her credit for her actual convictions. She committed these crimes because they were a function of her ideology and view of the United States of America. So what's going on ultimately here with Hannah Jones and Lamont Hill and their ilk? Well, at the end of the day, they hate the United States of America as currently constituted because they believe it exists on a foundation of a system of oppression, even though they won't openly say that they endorse violence. They are willing to whitewash the violence of past radicals because they are deeply sympathetic with it. They think these were acts of righteousness at the end of the day. And that doesn't tell us anything important about Shakur and her crimes. It does tell us something important about them and their corrupt ideology. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.